You are now listening to TheGrio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
So, like today on TheGrio Daily, we're going to be doing something different, right? There's this great documentary, and I'm kind of a documentary nerd. Not even a nerd, right? It's just like my favorite form of film. Like some people like horror movies. I don't believe in ghosts, so I watch documentaries. But in a sense, this documentary that we're going to be talking about today is kind of about ghosts, America's ghosts. And it's about the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. It's going to be on HBO. And today we're privileged, it was the first time I've ever called myself privileged, to be talking with the director and the producer of that film. And it's Katrina Babies. And so I want to welcome him to TheGrio Daily. I'm Michael Harriot, world famous white peopleologist, and this is TheGrio Daily.
Yo, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thank you for joining me, man. I'm a huge fan of documentaries, and I thought this just gave so much perspective and was such encapsulation of not just like, sometimes you see documentaries that, tug on your heartstrings and tell a poignant stories, but it doesn't really give you any insight on the system, and which is what we talk about a lot in this podcast, about the systemic issues or about the historical issues or how this affects us, right? Like it's just a story about a thing that happened to somebody.
Nobody ever asked the children how they were doing. So I am.
Katrina Babies, take one.
And that's what I love about this documentary is not just the stories of people who are affected by a thing that happened, but it's about how it's not really just about like the random act of a hurricane.
Absolutely.
Or a weather event. So the first thing I want to know is how did you find like these specific stories and did you were there like 12 people that you looked at and then narrowed it down, or did you just happen upon these specific stories?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I first started working on the project, I was a junior at Dillard University. I was taking a documentary class, and obviously I grew up on the social media doings, and I don't have a film background. My mother doesn't have a film background, so I didn't really know what I was doing outside of like taking like the class. So even like when it came to quote unquote casting, right, this documentary, my go-to process was to go straight to Facebook, right? I was worried that not many people would want to share their stories, honestly, because again, in New Orleans, we're really funny about stuff like that, when it comes to giving our stories away, especially to like films, because we've seen it done wrong so many times.
In America, especially during disaster, Black children are not even a thought.
Have you ever talked about this before?
No, I haven't.
Why you think?
I don't know, nobody didn't really ask me.
Hurricane Katrina caused one of the biggest disbursements of Black people in history.
When I went to Facebook, and I posted, hey, I'm looking for people who were young during Hurricane Katrina, because I want to tell y'all a story. I was surprised at the fact that there was like a uproar of people that was ready to, sit down and talk about their experiences. And that kind of gave me a form of validation, to see that so many people wanted to share what they had experienced in 2005.
Yeah, so you say you don't have a background in filmmaking or this whole process. One of the things we explain on this podcast is that when we talk about those processes or, the general way we make film, it's just some shit that people figured out themselves, right? It ain't no process. They call it a process, but it's just some stuff that people figured out themselves.
Thanks.
And we know that we have the creativity
Absolutely
to do that stuff themselves. And you basically, it's kind of bad to have you on this podcast because you did what every student in every documentary filmmaker thinks that they're going to be able to do in their head is I'm going to find me a story, and as soon as I get out of college, I'm going to make a film. That it almost never happens. It's the dream of it was my dream. So I know, and it's the dream of every filmmaker. So how did you go from asking people on Facebook to literally having HBO say, that's a good idea, man. We'll put it on our platform?
When I first came up with the idea in college, I sat on it for about maybe a year and a half. And like I never started to like, water it or like invest in it. I just set on like pretty much I set on the name. I was like, I'm gonna make a documentary called Katrina Babies. Like, you know what I'm saying? And then like, I sat on it. And then, as real life was happening, because again, I'm a big part of this story. I am close to this film. I fled Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and I'm from New Orleans, and I returned to New Orleans. So it was very, very close to me.
I remember I asked one of the adults, wait, like if like all of this is underwater, what happened to the people who stayed behind? Like where are they? And like, she was like, like looked me dead in my eye as a kid and said, everybody who stayed in New Orleans is dead. And like, I just started crying. Like instantly, I just started crying. Looking at the TV screen and her saying that, it seemed like it was true.
I always say that growing up in New Orleans and all of my time in New Orleans was really like a unintentional research and like development process, right? So even when I thought that I wasn't working on this film, I was working on it by just simply living in New Orleans, right? So I kept getting signs, right? And, I felt like I kept getting like messages from God that, I should be working on this project, like honestly. And it was one holiday season, my cousin Tina, who's in the film, she called me up and, she was like speaking to everybody like in the family about still being displaced because, normally for holidays, we would all be together. And she was very, very emotional like this holiday. And once she and I got on the phone, she, was telling me that, she'd been seeing all the stuff that my mama been putting on Facebook about, me telling stories and like, shooting videos or whatever. And, she was just like, yo, like one day I'm gonna let you make a movie about my life. And I was like, okay, well, what type of movie? You know what I'm saying? Because like, everybody said that. Like everybody like, yo, like everybody said that, right? So
as a writer, they tell me, I want you to write a book about my life, man. You need to write a book about my life.
Yes, exactly. And I'm a college student like at the time. So I'm like, well, tell me more. Like what happened? And she just instantly started to, talk about Hurricane Katrina. So just for context, my family evacuated during Hurricane Katrina. My immediate family, my parents and my sisters and I evacuated. And my cousins, who were pretty much like my best friends, Tina's kids, they chose to ride out the storm and stay in New Orleans. So that's the context. So she told me about the story that they experienced once they stayed in New Orleans, and it was heavy. It was heavy to hear like on that holiday. And once she told me about what happened with she and her children, specifically when she talked about what her children saw, something just clicked. And that idea that I had about Katrina Babies, I was like, I got to start this right now. And really the main reason was because after growing up in the post-Katrina New Orleans, I had heard so much throughout my whole childhood that, y'all kids are bad. Y'all kids are violent. Y'all kids are criminals. Like, y'all have, like behavior problems. And as soon as she told me that story, something just clicked in my head. I was like, wait, what if the reason that we're acting out is because of what children experienced in 2005?
The displacing of Black communities all over the city started to cause like this trickle-down effect of, you are no longer in the community you came up in. You are now being put in like concentrated areas or like pockets.
And that was really how I started the journey. And, I just stayed consistent for like 7 years. Like, people would always ask me like, yo, like, how long is this project going to take? And like, I was like, honestly, this is real life. So I can't rush real life. And my mentor, Chike Oza, who's one half of Cootie and Chike, he just kept checking on me every year. Like, yo, like, how's the project going? And like, anytime like I would venture off, he would be like, bro, this is the project, like, it's going to change your life. Right. So then 2020 hits and like pandemic hits and God set us down, right? And when God set us down, I was forced to just sit quiet with Katrina Babies. I didn't have any other work coming in. And I got that call, like, I got that annual call from Chike, like, yo, what's going on with our Katrina Babies? I might have an opportunity for you. And he introduced me to his producer, Audrey Rosenberg, and then also introduced me to a company that he was working with, Time Studios of Time Magazine. And, honestly, bro, everything started moving fast after that. Like it's like right after that, a few weeks later, we pitched to HBO and like HBO wanted it in the room. And it's just been the grind since then, So I'm still kind of, I don't want to say shocked, but like, I'm still it's still like a feeling of like surrealism. Like, to even be here, talking to you about it, like we have a finished product, it's still like a bit surreal, but I'm grateful,
It took nearly a decade for this documentary to be made, but that's just the beginning of the story. In part 2, you'll hear Edward explain how the tragedy of Katrina opened his eyes to how the government in America sees Black people. Don't forget to subscribe to TheGrio Daily to make sure you don't miss this conversation. More on Katrina Babies next time.
You are now listening to TheGrio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
You're watching the Blackest Questions podcast with Christina Greer.
In this podcast, we ask our guests 5 of the blackest questions so we can learn a little bit more about them and have some fun while we're doing it.
Okay, so this is a trick question.
We're also going to learn a lot about Black history, past and present.
Beautiful. I learned a wonderful fact today. Great.
So here's how it works. We have 5 rounds of questions about us. Black history, the whole diaspora, current events, you name it. With each round, the questions get a little tougher.
Oh, you got me. Let me see.
I have no idea.
I knew you were going to go there, Dr. Greer.
Subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast and share it with everyone you know.